myself again. But it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on the thoughts I cannot say to you. If I don't say the words, then maybe it's not true. And it feels alright when they come and say to you.
Hi, welcome along to NUFC Matters. This is the review of Eddie Howe's press conference for the Liverpool game, which kicks off 5:30 tomorrow. And first up was Razor from BBC Radio Newcastle, and he's just checking up on the welfare of the players who went off injured last week. Eddie Howe first asked about Joe Willock. He said, we haven't seen much of him this week, but the good news is that it's a minor complaint and he does have a chance of making the cup final at Wembley the following week. As for Miggy and ASM, both players were fine and were back in training. ASM seemed to be fine straight after the game, and Miggy had a slight problem with his hand, which has not proved to be anything serious, so good news. Razor also asked him about Callum Wilson. He said he'd done really well this week, but he hadn't been training with the team, but he was going to be training with the first team today. And, you know, if he trained today, then he may well be back in contention for the game tomorrow. Razor asked him about Matt Targett. He says, yeah, he's been training with us this week. And he is getting very close to a comeback. He also asked about the welfare of Isak. Starting the first Premier League game, what kind of condition was he in? He said he was in good physical condition. He was probably in his best form before the concussion incident. Missing that week of training did affect him, but lasting 90 minutes is a good sign. He gave a good physical effort. He just felt that maybe didn't get the ball in the right places from the team last week, and that probably reflected a little bit badly on him. He also asked him about Joe Linton. Was he concerned? Obviously, he's on 9 yellow cards. He said he'd revisited the booking that Joe got last week. He said, look, it's missed time by the smallest of margins. Got to accept that he is very physical. His stats on duels are incredible, but obviously we don't want to lose him, but we don't want to change him. So, basically, we all know that Joe Linton getting a yellow card tomorrow wouldn't mean that he would miss the final. An automatic red, of course, would be an automatic suspension. Also talked about altering systems in the games. Is it something that he may well look at, especially if Wilson and Isak find themselves fit at the same time. He basically, the point Razor was trying to make was he does change the systems in the game. Is he likely to change it, moving forward? And he said, look, I'm usually very consistent. Change isn't, in mind at the moment, but never say never. You can make changes which can be the right decisions for the team. You've also got to look at the opponent and the players that your opponent have got, always very cagey on stuff like that. Also asked about Arsenal being beaten at home by City this week, of course, and City going back top of the Premier League. Razor pointed out that Newcastle have the only unbeaten home run now, and he just said how central has that been, and how central has that been to the run that they've put together. He said it's been pivotal. Home form always is. He just said we've been frustrated at times with teams coming and, setting up stall to get away with at least a point, and we've got to find a way around it. He's sure that Liverpool will be a tough test tomorrow. Keith Downey from Sky next. Again, just asked him a little bit about the injuries, and in the sense that he said, look, you must be pleased because, the injury situation certainly looks better than you thought, last week. And he said, yeah, look, we knew Miggy and the ASM weren't as bad, and it's good news on Willock. So we appreciated that. He also pushed it a little bit and said, this happens to most teams. And he said, yeah, that of course it does happen to most teams. You do have parts in the season where you will lose, certain players from certain positions. And he said, that's why you need to have versatile players within the squad. And he highlighted Joe Linton, saying that he played in a variety of positions this season. And he says, although you may be missing what you would consider a player in a particular area, the versatile player coming in gives you strength in that area for a particular game. He was also saying, have you asked, are you continuing to, push the players and asking them to push on? And, he just said, look, I think what Keith was probably trying to get at was, this is a league game. You've got the cup final on the horizon. You're having to push the players, and he just goes, look, you've got to keep pushing the players, and you want the players giving 100%, and you've also got to keep the players fresh, keep the ideas taking over. So from his perspective, yeah. It was an answer to that. He also asked if he felt that the old Liverpool won for the defeat at the start of the season. And he went, I would never say that. He said, we owe it to ourselves. I'm very reluctant to use Liverpool as motivation. Keith also asked, do you ever look at the league table and look at them below you and, think, about that? You look at the other teams below you, and he went, I don't look at the table. I don't analyze. He says, because it changes so quickly. He says, I'm aware where we are, though. He says, and big teams that are below us certainly do want to be above us, and we've just got to keep on doing what we do and concentrate on ourselves and not on other teams. Keith also pointed to the atmosphere at the crowd from the crowd at St James's, and just saying that you really do want it to be a fortress tomorrow. And he went, yeah, look, I'm pleased with how the players respond to the crowd and vice versa. The crowd have carried us, and he says it's because they see the players' body language, he sees the effort they put in, and he says we're going to need them, again tomorrow. Keith also mentioned Sir Bobby Robson's 90th birthday anniversary. Obviously, War Flag's going to do a big display, and he says, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it. It'll be a fitting tribute, I'm sure, to an incredible man. He says, although it's unfortunate I never met him, I've heard a lot of stories from people around the club over the last week or so, and I take a lot from them. Andy Sixsmith was up next. He says, any strange requests with regards to tickets for Wembley? He went, yeah, I've had lots of requests from people I don't know, just reiterating what he'd said last week. Sixsmith also mentioned that he'd seen Dan Burn and interviewed him, and that there'd been Alan, I think, must have been a reference. Alan Shearer had surprised him by popping in to see him. He said, is that something you're looking at doing in the build-up to the cup final, having ex-players come in? He went, it's not confirmed, it needs to be right, and it needs to be the right people at the right time. He says, we've had some in already. He says, but I won't go into the details. Andy Sixsmith also pushed him about Sir Bobby, said that quite a few people had compared him to Sir Bobby Robson, said there'd been certain elements of what he does, compared to Sir Bobby. And he just said, well, it's nice to hear that. He says, it's not for me to say that, of course. He says, I personally feel that I'm a long way off doing what he did here. Andy reminded him that he was now up for his 50th Premier League game, of which he'd have, of course, had won 23. He said, yeah, again, he says, I didn't know that. He says, but he says, listening to the stats that you've given us, he said, I know I want to do more and I want to do better. Andy then mentioned the 17-game unbeaten run, and obviously highlighted the fact there'd been 5 draws in 8. He says, after the low that you'd had at Anfield, would you have taken that run? And he went, yes, certainly would have taken it. He says, however, he says, I don't like to focus too much on unbeaten records. He says it just takes one bad 10 minutes and that record's gone. He says, I certainly don't want the players to focus on the unbeaten record. He says, I want them to focus on, playing to the best of their ability and going out to win tomorrow. Andy again just said, I'm sure you want intensity on and off the pitch, like you had at the Man City and the Arsenal games. And he went, yeah, of course I do. He says, the intensity was great, from the crowd, for Man City and Arsenal. He says, and tomorrow's a similar challenge. Liverpool are an outstanding team. We've got an outstanding manager, and we need to be at our very best, and we need the fans behind us. Nisha was up from BBC Radio, Newcastle, and BBC TV. She was just saying Liverpool versus Newcastle, Newcastle versus Liverpool. No matter where these games have been played in recent times, Liverpool have always been the favourites, but not anymore. And she went, that shows how far you've come. Fans coming up to the ground tomorrow will be, full of expectancy and hoping they can see Newcastle win. And he went, yeah, he says, look, that's pleasing. He says, but we've got to be at our best, and we've got to control certain aspects of the game tomorrow. But yeah, it's exciting. And he said, he is pleased that fans should be coming up to the ground thinking like that. Also saying goals are an issue. That was another thing that Nisha brought up. What have you been doing, to try and sort that out behind the scenes? And he said, we believe a lot in repetition. He says, if you look at the records and look at the stats, he says the chance creation hasn't been that bad. Most games we've dominated. It's just the chances that we've created, we haven't taken them. But he said, I believe in repetition of attacking moves. So from my perspective, I just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and drilling my ways and theories into the team. So it doesn't sound as if he's too concerned about that. He feels that goals will come. Nisha also mentioned the final being on the horizon, and it's a big fixture. Does that make it easier to ask the players to go out and put in a good performance? And he agreed. He says it is good to have that. He says because if the players have got half an eye on the game in at Wembley, then they're in trouble. He says, but from our perspective, having such a big game from our perspective is it's ultimately what you need. People need to really push on and get that opportunity to maybe win the game against Liverpool, but then get into the ultimately get into the cup final team or the squad. Bruno was next. He's been a miss on the pitch, of course, but what's he been like behind the scenes? And what he basically said was, look, he's a very positive guy. You can feel he's present in the room, and he's got a good circle of friends. He puts in a lot of laughter. In and around the dressing room. He has been a big miss. We've missed him massively, but as well, from our perspective, it'll be good to have him back for the cup final. Damien was in next. He said, Sir Bobby never got us to a final. Where would that rank you? Now, do you not feel as if you're a little bit more level? And he's not going to accept that kind of praise. He'll never do that. And he just said, look, we move forward quickly in this job. It's 100 miles an hour. I don't have time to look at things like that. And, I'm looking at opponents and players and teams in the next game. So he swerved it again, to be honest. Damien mentioned the fact that Isak had made such a good impact at Anfield. Has it been disappointing that he hasn't continued to make that impact, mainly due to injury? And he went, yeah, look, it's been difficult. I've said this before, he said, but when he got the injury, he's at a new club, and it has been disappointing. But since he's come back, he's picked up quickly, he's done well from the bench. And he says, I can't wait to get him and Callum fit together. Luke Edwards then was next, talking about the game against Liverpool. He just said it was a bad-tempered game from my memory. And he said, no, not that I can recall. He said, well, after the game, he went, well, not really. He says it was difficult and painful, that game, for us. He says, obviously losing the game in the last few minutes, but he says, I thought we were managing the game. I thought we were doing well. I thought we could have won it. He says, but from my perspective, I don't think there was any contentious moments. He says, until right at the end of the game. Luke then, tried to redeem himself by talking about ruffled feathers, and saying that Newcastle had ruffled the feathers of the big guns such as Arsenal. And he says, you come out with the phrase, we're not here to win, friends, we're here to compete. And he just said, yeah, he says that is our saying. He says we aren't here to win, friends. We're here to compete. We don't want to be a team of good losers, and we're trying to instill every day a winning culture within the team and within the squad. So just a re-emphasis really of what he'd said earlier in the season. Luke also said, the way that some of the managers have spoken about you this season and about the club this season, do you take that as a backhanded compliment? And again, he didn't want to get drawn into that. He just said, I don't know what to say. He says, all I know is what people say in our city and, at the club. So I don't really pay much attention to that. Ian Murter from the Daily Star said, are we, as far as the pecking order is concerned in the Premier League, do you see yourself as an equal of Liverpool now? He just said, I don't really know. It's difficult for me to judge where we are. He said, we need to prove ourselves over a longer period of time. He said, Ian then moved on and said, when you're losing all the time, you're in a bit of a rut and you need to probably change things. When you're winning all the time, you probably don't need to change things. He said, but when you're drawing lots of games, is it difficult to assess form? And he just said, yeah, sometimes it can be. He says what we try to instill into the players is that a draw can look better if you win the next game after that. He says, so, there is peaks and troughs in a season. And he says you want to turn a negative run, into a quick positive, as quickly as you can. Lee Ryder next. Again, just saying, you're continuing the same style, an attacking brand of football. Would it be disappointing if he didn't make the Champions League playing that kind of football? And he just said, again, he didn't really answer the question, just said, look, we always want to entertain. We always want to attack. We're not playing for draws. The style and the way that we've played and the way that we've trained has served us well, and we're not going to change. He said, Lee then asked if he would be a bit wary about Liverpool catching Newcastle on the counter attack, maybe coaxing them into a false sense of security. He shot them down with that one. He just said, I don't think they'll sit back. It's not in Liverpool's DNA. He says they've always had the ability to run box to box. They're a good team. They're very athletic, and it'll be a big test for us tomorrow. And Lee then talked a little bit about the goal that Liverpool scored against Everton in the Merseyside derby. In essence, just trying to back up his, catching people on the counter attack kind of stuff. And he just said, look, games can be won on the margins of a bounce and spin of a ball. Your whole world can be defined by it, as Sean Dyche found out against Liverpool the other night. He asked him about Matt Targett, whether he'd have a chance of making it onto the bench at Wembley, and that was an affirmative. He said yes, he certainly could. He also talked about Newcastle being booed off by the home crowd at Anfield. He says, I remember the night and I remember the reaction, but I don't read too much into it. He says, more negative reaction you get from a home crowd like that, he says, the better you are doing. Also said that tomorrow he just wants the supporters to support them and react to the positive stuff that they're doing and not get sucked into any negativity. Lee also asked about Gareth Southgate. Apparently he was at the training ground yesterday, and he said, yeah, it was good to see him. I respect him a lot, and we've got a good relationship. And he was up in the northeast, obviously, as well to do the St Oswald's charity dinner, which Graham Jones had organised, and he said he hoped that they'd raised a lot of money. Scott from the Northern Echo was next, and just said, is it sometimes difficult? Do you have to tweak things when Wilson plays up front as opposed to Isak, and vice versa? Are there subtle differences in the way that you attack? And do you have to tweak it? Yeah, slightly different, but similar in the sense of profile. He says, but we do make subtle changes. He says, but you can't stop players doing things instinctively. Also asked him about Anthony Gordon potentially making a start against Liverpool. Do you look into that kind of thing, how well a player does against certain teams? And Eddie just said, well, a little mix of some. He says, if a player hasn't trained well for 3 weeks, he says, I don't look at a game and go, well, because he scores against Liverpool on a regular basis, or because he scores at this particular ground, well, I'm going to stick him in this week. He said, it's got to be a balance of two things. He said, but he says, these things happen in football. Lots of these things happen in football, but it is part of the process. But it's not solely down to that. Martin was next and asked him about what the atmosphere was like in the dressing room after the defeat at Anfield. He says, you're testing my memory here. He says it was a mixture of anger and frustration. He says, I've replayed the controversial moment. He didn't say controversial. I'm just describing it as controversial. He says, I've just, replayed that moment many times. I just don't want it to happen again. And, he says, when I look back at that game, I still feel like we could have won it. Martin then said, was that a springboard for the run? He says, well, maybe it was. He says, because we're desperate not to feel like that again. He says, the Sheffield Wednesday defeat in the FA Cup was the same. He said, I felt that kind of feeling, enough as a player. And he says, it's 100 times worse as a manager, believe you me, than a player. He was asked, did you think in this season that you would be toe-to-toe with the likes of Liverpool in the league and in the cups? And he just said, again, all I can control is what I do with my team, with my players. And, we just do it game at a time. Martin asked him how big the game was. He went, it's a huge game against Liverpool. From our perspective, we'll focus on one game at a time, but it is a very, very big game. Mark Douglas, nice to hear him back in the press room. He was asking about Klopp having some stick off the press in recent weeks, and Eddie defended him. He just said, look, people have got short memories. He's played a consistent, unrivaled brand of football. One of the very best managers of all time. He said, look, all teams go through bad runs. And Mark said he's also a bad loser. And, he said, well, he says, if you're a good loser, you're in the wrong job. And he said, we both don't like losing. So, that was the end of that question and answer. And, he was asking him again just about the message to the players about this game, and he just said, look, keep the same principles, don't change. And he said, it's served as well so far. Craig Hope was next. Tended to use his questions today about the stuff that's been done in the press over the last few months, and Klopp's been in the middle of it at times, about buying success at Newcastle, but Liverpool have spent more. He said, I don't want to comment. I can't comment on that. I don't know what the situation is at Liverpool. I only focus on, what we do. And, all I'll say is we've used our windows wisely. Craig pushed it a bit more and said, I would say he said that there's been a lot more to, what's happened at Newcastle and just money. It's about having good transfer windows, training, etc. And he just said, yeah, look, there's lots of different components, when you get to this level, and it's not just about money. Probably something he was going to agree with, but he was very careful not to get dragged into this, because this could easily have been made Klopp versus Howe. And I've got to say, I watched Klopp's press conference, and he was pushed by his press in a similar shape, and he was very complimentary about Eddie Howe today. He turned around and said that Howe has done exceptionally well, and that they've done well, and they haven't spent the money. And then he was asked, well, what did you expect Newcastle to spend that kind of? He said, well, I don't know. And Klopp went down the same road as Eddie Howe today, and I was pleased that he did that. It means it's not about those two; it's about the two teams that they manage. Craig then said, is Klopp the kind of person you share a drink with after the game? Would you do it? Eddie said, look, when I came into the game, that was something which was almost written in stone, but he says, it's going out of the game now. He says, but yeah, if the situation arises, of course, I'd have a drink with him after the game. Miles was next on the Shields Gazette. He basically said, look, you mentioned Callum Wilson will be training today and, to see whether he's fit for tomorrow. But will you have one eye on the cup final next weekend if, depending on how fit he is? And he just said, look, we'll have one eye on whether he's 100% fit. He then asked him about Matt Targett and how much he's missed him. He said, look, we've definitely missed him. He's a great player. He's got a great character. He goes about his business in a professional way. He's got different attributes to Dan Burn, but it's a great boost welcoming him back into the squad to train. Kieran was up next. And again, he just said, did you feel when Klopp was saying those things about the club earlier in the season that you needed to defend the club? And he went, look, if people attack the club, it's part of my job to defend the club. And again, he asked about the former players who potentially had come to the club or had been to the club, whether from a particular era. And he said, well, look, I think it's 1-0 to us. He said, because we managed to keep this out of the press. Nobody knew about it. But he said, I think the players that came in were from the Kevin Keegan era. And they came in, the sport of the players, and it was great. So that's it. That is the review of the press conference today. As usual, Eddie given very little away, but great news on the injury front when you bear in mind that this time last week we were looking at it going, oh my God, we're going to be without ASM, Miggy and Willock for the final. Well, it looks like all three, touch wood, they'll come through unscathed tomorrow, will be okay. And Callum Wilson, certainly not severe injury. He's going to make the right decision, shall we say. I'll give a quick shout out to the chat. Hi, Kevin. Hi, Trolls. Hi, Kamal. Hi, Bear Britain Audits. A new face in the chat. Good to see you. Les, how are you? Yep, no worries. We'll catch up later. I'm shocked Klopp has said that where we are at the minute is because of Howe, not money. Trolls, it was good, wasn't it? It was really good to see that. Really nice change. Agreed. I watched the Klopp conference thinking the same, says Kamal. So yeah, well, I have a micro bit more respect for him for saying that. Yeah, I think most of us will, and it takes it away from being Klopp versus Howe. I'm not amazed by anything Klopp says. Seems to get more deranged as time goes on, in my opinion. Les, he was actually, Les really was today. He was very, very complimentary of Newcastle. You know, it definitely has changed. I think it's humbled him, this recent run of form. Hopefully we'll win on Saturday and witness another meltdown, says Les. When an angry Klopp comes at you, you see a row of white teeth running at you. And one thing it is, says Les, I doubt he'll run up and down the sideline like a maniac. The crowd will give him dog's abuse. Good afternoon, Paul. We will be back later on, so look forward to seeing you all in the chat later. Les says, as always, Trolls crowd has a huge role to play, and I hope the ref protects our players, because otherwise, given their nasty tackles, we could end up with some awful injuries. Don, hope you're well. Nice to catch a live one. Yeah, just the press conference review, mate. So you haven't missed anything major. Nice show, and thank you for summing up. Jopadini, it's my pleasure. We do these every week. It's just nice because if you haven't got time to listen to the press conferences, or you maybe the owner who's actually asking the questions, I've met all of these people, so it is sometimes nice to be able to just give you a lowdown on it. Anyway, I'm back with the three amigos, 5 o'clock till 7. I look forward to seeing you all then. And Saturday morning, 10 o'clock, Liam Kennedy is back. Thanks as always to our sponsors, Skips and Bins, telephone 0800 25 45 25 3, email inquiries at skipsandbins.com, website skipsandbins.com, easy contract free and pay as you go waste collection. Thanks to Mr. Vicky's sauces, handmade in Cumbria. You can find them at mrvickys.co.uk, email info@mrvickys.co.uk, or telephone 01768 210 102. Thanks to Blowhole Brewery. You can find them at blowholebrewery.co.uk. Beers brewed on the River Tyne. And thanks to United Group Travel Limited, UK Coach Holidays, based in Morpeth. Telephone 01670 362 460 and mobile 07957 141 654. Graham, your driver, Beverly answering your calls, looking after you on your tour. Thanks also to 3 Property, who specialise in sourcing investment properties for their clients who are looking to invest in the North East. They offer a full in-house service from sourcing the deals to managing the properties for you. They've done over 100 plus deals in the past 12 months for clients all over the UK. Give the guys a follow on Instagram, matty.patter_northeast property and phil.reed_northeast property, or email phil@3property.co.uk if you're interested in getting a good property deal. Thanks to qtechshop.co.uk, the makers of pool tables and snooker tables in Wales and Newcastle, and the guys who run our website, nufcmatters.com. Thanks to Media Arts for all the help with the videos and the technology side of things. If you want to subscribe to the channel, hit the subscribe button underneath the video today. Hit the thumb up to like the channel and click share to your social media. We're also available as a podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and the rest. If you want to become a member, you pay a £25 one-off fee, and you can go to the website, nufcmatters.com, and find membership pack, or put your smartphone over the QR code and it will take you straight there. If you subscribe, we do give you a free car sticker. All you need to do is email john@nufcmatters.com and he'll post you one out. We also support the food bank on this channel, nufcfansfoodbank.co.uk. You'll find the match day bucket where you can make a virtual donation. We've also got some events coming up over the next couple of months. First off, we've got an evening with Steve Howe at the Tyneside Irish Centre, Friday the 24th of February. Tickets are available from our website, nufcmatters.com, and they are priced £15, not $50, as you can see on the poster. An evening with Nobby Solano is also at the Tyneside Irish Centre, Saturday the 25th of March. Tickets are £15. Book now at nufcmatters.com. And an evening with Frank Clark and John Gibson, Thursday the 20th of April, again at the Tyneside Irish Centre. Tickets are £15 and you book now at nufcmatters.com. Supermac and John Gibson will also be at Felling Cricket Club on the 16th of February. To buy tickets for that, contact the venue direct. We've got a whole host of t-shirts available from our website, nufcmatters.com. Gives you plenty of ideas for presents, for birthdays, anniversaries, you name it. Get your Anthony Gordon t-shirts and your Wembley t-shirts today.